Look at her, she's so absurd. The Duke would never notice her. Just look at her gown. She's crying.
The first whispers always began before Eleanor entered the room. Inside the magnificent ballroom of Ashbourne Hall, crystal chandeliers bathed the polished marble floor in warm golden light. As England's nobility gathered for the annual spring charity ball, gentle music drifted through the air while ladies in silk gowns and gentlemen in tailored evening coats exchanged smiles and laughter, and carefully chosen compliments. Yet among all the conversations, one topic returned every year: the Duchess. I heard she ordered another dessert before dinner. Poor Duke William. Such a handsome man and such an unfortunate marriage. The women hid their smiles behind jeweled fans, believing their voices were too soft to travel beyond their circle. They were wrong. Eleanor heard every word. She paused for only a moment before continuing down the grand staircase, her ivory gown flowing gently around her fuller figure. The dress had been tailored by the finest seamstress in London. Yet no amount of silk or lace could silence the cruel judgments that followed her wherever she went. She had long ago stopped pretending those whispers did not hurt. She had simply learned how to smile through them. Tall, elegant, and admired throughout England, he greeted guests with effortless grace. Officers respected him. Noblemen envied him. Young ladies watched him whenever he crossed a room. When he saw Eleanor approaching, he offered a polite smile. "You look lovely this evening." She returned the smile. "So do you." For anyone watching, they appeared to be the perfect aristocratic couple. Only Eleanor knew how carefully rehearsed those smiles had become. As the orchestra announced the first waltz, couples stepped gracefully onto the dance floor. William turned toward Eleanor. For one hopeful second, she believed he would extend his hand. Instead, a young countess approached him. "Your Grace," she asked brightly, "may I steal the first dance?" William hesitated. Only briefly. Then he smiled. "It would be my pleasure." Eleanor quietly lowered her eyes. "It is only one dance," she told herself. She had repeated those words many times over the past 3 years. Only one. Only one dinner. Only one afternoon ride. Only one opera. Only one charity event. Yet somehow, there was always another beautiful woman standing beside her husband. William never crossed the line into scandal. He never kissed another woman. He never promised anyone his heart. But he enjoyed their company. He laughed more easily with them. He danced more often with them. And whenever newspapers published sketches of London's grandest gatherings, Duke William was almost never standing beside his own wife. As the evening continued, Eleanor remained seated near one of the tall windows. William danced with the young countess. Later, he escorted the daughter of a wealthy viscount through the gardens. Not long afterward, he shared champagne with an elegant widow recently returned from Paris. Each woman stayed beside him only a short while. Then another appeared. It had become a pattern everyone recognized. One elderly gentleman sighed quietly. "I've stopped trying to remember their names," his wife answered with a sympathetic glance toward Eleanor. "The poor Duchess remembers them all." Nearby, another woman laughed. "If I were married to her." She lowered her voice. "I'd probably do the same." More laughter followed. Eleanor looked out through the ballroom windows. Beyond the glass, spring flowers had begun to bloom beneath the moonlight. How strange, she thought, that flowers were admired in every shape and color. Only women were expected to bloom in exactly one way. Later that evening, the Dowager Duchess approached with measured elegance. Her silver gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers as she examined Eleanor from head to toe. "My dear," she said pleasantly, "perhaps darker colors would be more flattering." Eleanor smiled politely. "I happen to like this dress." "I'm sure you do." The older woman adjusted one of Eleanor's sleeves. But liking something and looking elegant are not always the same. Several ladies nearby exchanged knowing smiles. One covered her mouth to hide a laugh. William stood only a few yards away. He heard every word. His eyes met Eleanor's. She waited. Not for a grand speech. Not for an argument. Only for one simple sentence. "Mother, that's enough." Instead, William looked away. He began another conversation with a group of gentlemen discussing horse racing. The silence hurt more than the insult itself. After dinner, guests gathered on the ballroom terrace to enjoy music beneath the stars. Eleanor stepped outside for fresh air. From the rose garden below, soft laughter floated upward. She recognized William's voice immediately. Curiosity drew her closer. Hidden behind climbing roses, she saw him seated beside two young noblewomen. One playfully adjusted his cravat. The other laughed as William told a story from his university days. Yet together they painted a picture Eleanor understood all too well. William never seemed embarrassed when standing beside beautiful women, only beside his wife. She quietly stepped back before anyone noticed her. That night, after the last guests had departed, William found Eleanor standing alone in her dressing room. She was removing the jeweled pins from her hair one by one. He loosened his. The evening went rather well. She continued brushing her hair. Did it? He sensed something different in her voice. Eleanor. She turned toward him. May I ask you something? Of course. When you dance with all those women. She paused. Is it because you enjoy their company? William hesitated. They're simply friends. And when you leave me sitting alone? It's easier. Easier for whom? The question lingered between them. William looked toward the window instead of answering. Finally, he spoke. You know how society is. She gave a faint smile. No. I know how you are. He frowned. What is that supposed to mean? She walked slowly toward him. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. For 3 years, I've watched you search every ballroom for beautiful women to stand beside. Her voice remained remarkably calm. You've never once looked ashamed while standing beside them. She touched her own sleeve. But every time you stand beside me, you seem to disappear. William opened his mouth. No words came. Because she was right. He had never admitted it aloud. Not even to himself. He wasn't ashamed of Eleanor's kindness. Or her intelligence. Or the way she cared for every servant in the manor. He was ashamed of what other people thought when they looked at her. And that realization filled him with a guilt he could barely bear. Eleanor nodded slowly. Thank you. His brow furrowed. For what? For finally telling me the truth. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. She looked at him with heartbreaking gentleness. Sometimes silence says everything. The following morning, the servants awoke to find the Duchess's carriage missing. So were several trunks. William searched the manor from the library to the gardens before entering Eleanor's dressing room. The wardrobe stood half empty. The room felt strangely unfamiliar. Then he noticed something resting upon the vanity. Her wedding ring. Beside it lay a single folded note. William unfolded it with trembling hands. There was only one sentence. I've spent years trying to become a woman the world would accept. From today, I'd rather become the woman I can finally love. For the first time since their wedding day, Duke William Ashbourne realized that losing his wife had begun long before she walked out of the manor. When the Duchess disappeared, London treated it as little more than another piece of fashionable gossip. Some claimed she had gone to stay with distant relatives. Others whispered that the Duke had quietly arranged a separation to spare himself further embarrassment. Within a week, society had already moved on to newer scandals. Only William had not. Every morning, he found himself looking toward the staircase, expecting Eleanor to appear with her usual quiet smile. Every evening, he caught himself listening for the sound of her footsteps outside the library before remembering that the room upstairs now stood empty. For the first time in years, Ashbourne Hall felt too large. Not because it lacked people, but because it lacked one person who had quietly filled every corner of it. William wrote to Eleanor 3 days after she left. His first letter was brief. Come. There was no reply. A week later, he wrote again. This time he apologized for the spring ball. Still nothing. Over the following months, more letters followed. Some were formal, others deeply personal. None were answered. Eventually, even the servants stopped asking whether a reply had arrived. Nearly a year passed. Far from London, Eleanor had built a life no one in the capital could have imagined. She rented a small stone cottage overlooking the sea in a quiet coastal village where no one cared about noble titles. To the villagers, she was simply Miss Eleanor, the kind woman who bought bread from the old baker every Tuesday. Who volunteered at the village school, who spent long afternoons tending flowers beside her little garden. Who laughed easily, something she had almost forgotten how to do. Her life became wonderfully ordinary. She woke with the sunrise instead of preparing for aristocratic breakfasts. She walked along the cliffs every morning, breathing the cool sea air. She planted vegetables with her own hands. She learned to bake. She rode horses simply because she enjoyed it, not because society expected her to appear graceful in the saddle. Little by little, her body began to change. Not through punishment, not through starvation. But because her days were finally filled with peace instead of anxiety. The weight that had once seemed impossible to lose slowly disappeared. The constant exhaustion faded. The swelling in her face became less noticeable. Her cheeks regained their natural color. More importantly, something else returned, her confidence. For years she had believed she occupied too much space in every room she entered. Now she realized she had only been living in the wrong rooms. Back in London, William's life appeared unchanged. Beautiful women still surrounded him. One invited him to the opera. Another asked him to accompany her on a charity ride. A third insisted he join her family's country estate for the weekend. He accepted many invitations out of habit, yet each evening ended exactly the same. He began noticing things he had never noticed before. None of those women remembered how he took his tea. None asked whether he had slept well. None noticed when the old wound in his shoulder troubled him during cold weather. Eleanor had noticed every time. Without being asked. Without expecting praise. One rainy afternoon, William entered the music room. The piano remained exactly as it had on the night Eleanor left. His fingers brushed across the polished wood. He suddenly remembered something so ordinary that it nearly broke him. Every Sunday evening, Eleanor had played the piano while he read beside the fireplace. She never interrupted his reading. She simply filled the silence with gentle music. He had never thanked her. Not once. Weeks later, William attended another grand charity banquet in London. As always, elegant ladies gathered around him. One complimented his uniform. Another admired Ashbourne Hall. A third laughed at every story he told, even those that were barely amusing. While they spoke, William overheard two young noblewomen standing only a few steps away. "I suppose the Duke will escort someone different home tonight." "Of course he will." They laughed. "I doubt he even remembers half their names." The second woman smiled carelessly. "I never cared about him." "Neither did I. So why keep accepting his invitations?" She shrugged. "Because every lady enjoys being seen beside a duke." The first woman laughed again. "Especially one who's too embarrassed to stand beside his own wife." William felt the color drain from his face. They continued walking, never realizing he had heard every word. For the first time, he saw himself through someone else's eyes. He had spent years believing those women admired him. They admired his title. Nothing more. The respect he thought he was earning had been little more than borrowed attention. Several days later, the family physician requested a private meeting. "I recently received correspondence from a specialist in Edinburgh," the doctor said carefully. "It concerns Her Grace." William looked up immediately. "What about Eleanor?" The physician hesitated before placing a folded medical report on the desk. The report described a hormonal illness that often developed after severe emotional trauma and pregnancy loss. Untreated, it could cause dramatic weight gain, constant fatigue, swelling, and depression. His eyes stopped on one sentence: her condition was never caused by overeating or a lack of discipline. William looked at the physician in disbelief. "How long have you known this?" "I diagnosed the symptoms more than 2 years ago." "You told no one?" "I wrote to the manor several times." William frowned. "I never received those letters." The physician lowered his eyes. "I assumed they had reached you." Silence settled heavily over the room. William remembered every cruel joke. Every ballroom. Every dance with another woman. Every moment Eleanor stood alone while he silently wished she looked different. All that time, she had not been fighting laziness. She had been fighting an illness. And instead of asking if she was suffering, he worried about what strangers might think. William slowly closed the medical report. For the first time in his life, he understood that the greatest weight Eleanor had carried had never been on her body. It had been on her heart. The physician's report remained inside William's study long after the doctor had left Ashbourne Hall. At first, he avoided looking at it. Yet every evening after the servants had gone to bed and the manor had fallen silent, he found himself opening the same folder once again. Each page answered a question he had never thought to ask. Eleanor's weight had never been caused by laziness. Her constant exhaustion had never been an excuse. The swelling, the pain, the endless fatigue, they had all been symptoms of an illness that had quietly stolen her health while the world mocked her for it, including her own husband. William closed the report and stared into the fire. For years, he had believed he understood the woman he married. Now he realized he had barely known her at all. The discovery changed him more than anyone expected. Invitations from London's most prestigious families continued arriving every week, but they remained unanswered. The grand balls, hunting parties, and elegant dinners that had once filled his calendar no longer held any appeal. Even the women who had once competed for his attention slowly stopped calling at Ashbourne Hall after receiving polite refusals time and time again. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed the Duke had become ill. Others insisted he was mourning the marriage he had destroyed. William ignored them. For the first time in his adult life, the opinions of society no longer mattered. Nearly 18 months passed before he attended another public event. The Royal Spring Charity Auction brought together nobles from every corner of England, raising money for hospitals, orphanages, and village schools. William agreed to appear only because the cause itself mattered. He planned to make his donation, exchange a few polite greetings, and leave before the evening truly began. But fate had prepared something else. The moment he entered the ballroom, his footsteps slowed. Across the room stood Eleanor. She was speaking with two elderly ladies beside a table covered with fresh spring flowers. A soft emerald gown flowed gracefully around her, and the warm candlelight reflected gently across her hair. She looked healthier than she had in years, yet the greatest change had nothing to do with her appearance. She looked peaceful. There was no uncertainty in her smile. For the first time since William had known her, Eleanor carried herself like a woman who no longer questioned her own worth. He simply stood there, unable to move, unable to look away. Before he could gather the courage to approach her, a young baron bowed politely and asked. The orchestra began to play. As they crossed the ballroom together, William noticed something he had never expected. People weren't staring because they pitied her. They were smiling at her. When the dance ended, another gentleman stepped forward. Then another. A retired naval captain. A respected judge. Even a young viscount waited patiently nearby for his turn. No one seemed interested in making a spectacle of her. They simply enjoyed being in her company. Watching from across the ballroom, William finally understood something that had taken him far too many years to learn. Society had never admired perfection. It admired confidence. And Eleanor had finally found hers. Ironically, she had found it only after leaving him. Later that evening, Eleanor quietly slipped onto the palace terrace to enjoy a few moments away from the music. The gardens below were covered in soft moonlight while a cool spring breeze carried the scent of blooming roses through the open doors. William followed a few moments later. Eleanor. She turned calmly. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled politely. Good evening, Your. The formal greeting felt strangely painful. Once she had called him William. Now he was simply another duke. You look well, he said. I feel well. I'm glad. So am I. Silence settled between them once again. William took a slow breath before speaking. I wrote to you. I know. You never answered. Eleanor rested one hand on the stone railing and looked toward the gardens. Every letter asked me to come home, she said quietly. None of them asked whether I had finally found peace. He lowered his eyes. There was nothing he could say to defend himself. I've spent every day wishing I had understood sooner. I believe you. He looked up in surprise. You do? Yes. Another gentle silence followed. Then Eleanor looked at him with kindness instead of anger. I've forgiven you, William. Hope flickered across his face, but only for a moment. I've forgiven you, she repeated softly, but forgiveness isn't the same as trust. The words landed with quiet finality. She wasn't trying to hurt him. She was simply telling the truth. Just then, an elderly gentleman approached with a warm smile. Duchess Ashbourne, I was hoping to congratulate you. The new village schools have already welcomed their first students, Lord Carlisle said proudly. And the children's hospital you helped finance has changed hundreds of lives already. England needs more women willing to do what you've done. William stared at Eleanor. You funded a hospital? And 4 schools? He asked quietly. She nodded. I was fortunate enough to be able to help. You never told me. Her expression remained calm. You never asked. Lord Carlisle smiled kindly before excusing himself, leaving the terrace as quietly as he had arrived. William remained standing beside Eleanor, unable to hide his astonishment. He had spent years believing she needed him to become someone worthy. Instead, she had become extraordinary after finding the courage to believe in herself. A short time later, Eleanor's carriage disappeared into the London night. William watched until the last lantern faded from sight. Only then did he return to Ashbourne Hall. The following morning, while sorting through several boxes that had belonged to Eleanor, its pages had yellowed with age. Across the front, written in Eleanor's elegant handwriting, were words that made his hands tremble. Letters I never had the courage to give my husband. William slowly opened the first page, and everything he believed he knew about their marriage was about to change. William did not finish the journal in a single night. He could not. Some letters were only a page long. Others stretched across several pages, written during sleepless nights when Eleanor had no one else to speak to. She never complained. She never blamed him. Instead, she simply wrote down the things she had never found the courage to say aloud. One letter described the afternoon she had overheard two noble women laughing about her weight while William stood only a few feet away. I kept waiting for you to say something you never did. I smiled all the way home because I didn't want you to feel embarrassed by my tears. Another letter spoke about the months following her miscarriage. I wasn't afraid of losing the baby. I was afraid you would look at me and think I had failed you again. William closed the journal and covered his eyes. For years he had believed silence meant Eleanor was strong. Now he understood that silence had simply been the only place where she allowed herself to break. Over the following weeks he read every letter again, not because he enjoyed the pain, because he believed he deserved to feel it. When the final page was turned, he made a decision. If Eleanor never returned to Ashbourne Hall, he would accept it. If she never loved him again, he would accept that too. But he would spend the rest of his life becoming the man she had once believed he could be. Not for forgiveness. Because it was finally the right thing to do. Spring slowly gave way to summer. Without announcing his name or seeking public attention, William began supporting the projects Eleanor had started. The village schools received new books. The children's hospital gained another medical wing. Several struggling widows quietly discovered that their debts had been paid by an anonymous benefactor. Only one person knew who had provided the money: Lord Carlisle. He never mentioned William's name. That was exactly how the Duke wanted it. Months later, Eleanor was visiting one of the village schools, when she noticed a familiar figure repairing a broken wooden fence alongside several local workers. His coat was covered with dust. His sleeves were rolled above his elbows. For a moment, she wondered if she had mistaken him for someone else. Then he looked up. Their eyes met. William smiled first. Not the confident smile that had once charmed London's nobility. A quieter one. Almost uncertain. I didn't expect to see you here, Eleanor said. I hoped I might. She glanced toward the children laughing nearby. They told me someone has been helping this village for months. William nodded. They deserved better. And you never wanted anyone to know? No. She studied him for several seconds. The old William would have made sure every newspaper in London heard about his generosity. The man standing before her seemed interested only in whether the fence would keep the children safe. People really could change. Not quickly, not perfectly, but honestly. They walked together through the school garden as the afternoon sun settled over the countryside. For the first time in years, the conversation came easily. William asked about He listened as Eleanor spoke about each child's dreams. He laughed when she described the youngest boys constantly climbing trees instead of attending lessons. He listened far more than he spoke. And Eleanor noticed. When they reached the old oak tree near the edge of the school grounds, William finally stopped. There is something I've wanted to ask you. She waited. Would you ever consider coming home? Eleanor looked across the fields before answering. Ashbourne Hall was never my home. William felt his heart sink. Then she turned toward him. Home isn't a place. He looked at her. It's the person you feel safe beside. A long silence followed. I wasn't safe before, she continued gently. I know. But hope returned to his. I'm beginning to feel that maybe one day I could be. William did not step closer. He did not reach for her hand. He had learned that love could not be rushed. It had to be chosen. Weeks later, Eleanor accepted his invitation to visit Ashbourne Hall. Nothing had been prepared to impress her. No musicians. No lavish celebration. No grand announcement. Instead, William quietly led her toward the manor library. Everything looked almost the same as before, except for one small corner beside the window. There stood a comfortable reading chair surrounded by fresh flowers and shelves filled with the novels Eleanor had once loved. On the table rested her old journal. Beside it lay a single handwritten note. If you choose to stay, every room in this house will finally become a home. If you choose to leave, I will still be grateful for everything you taught me. This time the choice belongs entirely to you. Twice, William. Eleanor read the note. Then she carefully closed the journal. When she turned around, William was still standing near the doorway, giving her all the space she needed. She crossed the room slowly. Without a single word, she reached for his hand. He looked at her, almost afraid to breathe. I can't promise we'll never hurt each other again, she whispered. Neither can I. But I think, a small smile appeared, we finally know how to listen. He blinked. It's the beginning of ours. Outside the library windows, the first summer roses swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. For the first time since the day they had married, neither of them was trying to become the person the world expected. They had finally become themselves. And somehow, that was enough.